Yo guys, check out this endgame belt option here. It's something I've started running with, the Micro-distillery belt. Can you see what's special about it? 52% increased flask effect is crafted into this one belt. In my opinion, that rivals Headhunter, Mage Blood in terms of power that you can do depending on the setup you're using. And I'm telling you what, this may very well be the strongest flask bar you've ever seen, given the power of tinctures, all that increased effect of tinctures, increased effect of flasks, the flask chosen. We're going to break it down for you in this video. What's up guys, Snoo here, and you can see I'm doing some pretty tough content right now using this belt and this flask bar. What you're looking at is Wildwooded, Titanic, Rogue Exiles, 2 additional projectiles, Deep Delirium Mirror. This is some of the hardest content that existed in the game, at least starting in 3.25, and it's something that bows can do. It's a little sketchy, but I've really been working hard on getting as much power as I can into the build, and I've been keying in on the flask bar in particular to do that. So here's the Micro-distillery belt. In the wiki, it says can't use flask in 5th slot. Flasks applied. You have 30% increased effect. 30% increased effect. Wouldn't you like to have a craftable belt that gives you a 30% flask effect increase as it's implicit? Seems pretty insane to me, but I guess it makes sense with the downside being as horrendous as it is, except it's not if you're melee. So this belt seems to be a gift given to melee, as they can just simply plug in their tincture in the 5th slot. So yes, indeed, the tincture does go into a flask slot, but is not considered a flask, and so it's effectively nullifying the downside for this belt, making it a prime candidate for a very strong endgame belt. Wouldn't you know it, Warden gets to play range with tinctures, not 1 but 2, with a whole bunch of increased flask effects. So my decision going Warden bows wasn't for this belt in particular, but this has been a sort of super late endgame addition to the build, or at least as an option for the belt slot, and for good reason. So then, just how much power am I getting on this flask bar? I'm going to give it to you in TLDR fashion, and then we're going to spend the rest of the video kind of breaking things down in the numbers, the path of building, and looking at all that, so you can see by the end just how impactful this flask bar is and where all of that power is coming from. First up, I guess let's start with, maybe least to most impactful. We have the Quicksilver Flask. You can see the numbers on there. It looks like a pretty typical flask, trying to take advantage of rarity as a suffix to get a little bit of rarity into the build. Incidentally, the only place I have rarity on here is giving me 68% increased rarity of items found, as well as 91% movement speed when it's on. Next up, we have Dying Sun. In this case, with the build I have, the way it's set up, 40% increased area of effect and plus 4 additional projectiles, at least with this belt on. Next up is Progenesis, 95% increased chaos resistance and 68% damage reduction from all hits. It does also come with the downside of taking a greater damage loss. However, in combat with a huge amount of leech, instant leech, that doesn't mean a whole lot. Those 3 flasks may sound impressive, but honestly, it's nothing compared to the power of the tinctures. So let's move on to Rosethorn Tincture here. 527% increased critical hit chance with 100% increased attack speed while that's active. And then the Prismatic Tincture, maybe even better, 352% increased elemental damage with 65% elemental pen. Those are obviously some pretty insane numbers I just gave you. So to prove to you that I'm not blowing smoke, I'm going to use an in-game example. We're going to look at 3 different things here. One is number of arrows fired. I said Dying Sun, give me 4 arrows. So you're going to see this go from 5 to 9. You're going to see the penetration numbers go from 11 to 76 on account of 65 increase through this tincture here. And then we'll take a glance at defense to notice the chaos res, which is currently -20, is going to go all the way to cap. 95% increase chaos res would be 75% positive chaos res. There you can see 9 projectiles, 76 pen, and 75 chaos res. So here's the path of building. Let's look at some of these numbers to see just how much impact the flask bar is having real quick by looking at things like the full DPS number, the Fizz max hit, the movement speed number, And so you can see here that I'm starting with, no immortal call up or anything like that, with no flasks or tinctures effective here. And yeah, just you can snapshot this right now. Movement speed, effective hit, max phys hit, damage. So you see, once I put all of these in, effectively what this is doing is doubling my movement speed, giving me about triple the phys max hit, and about 6 times the amount of damage. Now, I do want to point out something I discovered fairly recently here, and this is actually something I learned back in 3.25. I thought it was fixed, but evidently the tinctures that they plug into Path of Building, if you have a well-crafted tincture and you just plug it straight in, it will pretty dramatically inflate the numbers of it. And this is, for some reason, PoE calculations doesn't take into account that the increased effect and quality of tinctures is already embedded into it. And so you actually have to go in and manually, undo the increased effect or quality like I've done here to get more accurate numbers. I've done this for both tinctures, by the way. And so this is kind of the new numbers where they're at. Over in the calculations, let's just take a look at Flask and Tincture effects here. We got 104 and 106 respectively. Let's see the breakdown of flasks here. You can see a lot of this is through gear. I recently changed Crit Multi implicit on the Eldritch Crafted body armor, which makes me even more enthusiastic to use an Eldritch Crafted body armor than I already was, referring back to that conversation with Doriani and the Admiral body armor. Anyway, now have 17% increased flask effect. That's a perfect implicit on the body armor. That replaced Crit Multi, which was really valuable, but I think you'll see in the end, especially if it's hitting a breakpoint of +1 prog on the flask, the Dying Sun, that's definitely worth it. And also have it on the belt. Got the Alchemist Genius, and then the 12% explicit there. I got a whole bunch through the passive tree. There's only one on the passive tree that I didn't take, and that's Careful Conservationist. And then, of course, I'm not a Pathfinder, so I don't get privilege to these things, but that would basically remove the ability to do bows with tinctures anyway, so that wouldn't work. The last point here that I'll bring up is the custom modifier, okay? So in configuration, I have Flask applied, you have 10% increased effect, Tincture Mastery Correction. That refers to this mastery here, which isn't apparently programmed in Path of Building. So that's where 104% Flask effect is coming from. As far as the tinctures, I mean, this is all just passives, okay? This is all of the, let's go in here and look at this. This is 3 10% nodes here in the ascendancy, small nodes, and then we have a whole bunch here. We got basically 3 wheels. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3. It's unfortunate I can't fit a life flask into here. I think that would hurt the power threshold too much. Definitely not worth 15% increased effect. But this is all the available effect, and it just so fortunately very conveniently located on this passive tree. As you can see, the tree, I didn't really have to like go out of my way. The only place I kind of went out of my way was down here, but this gives me an even better excuse to go the unnatural instinct route down here on the left-hand side. So tinctures have been kind of a conversation that many people have been a part of as far as Wardens. A lot of people have asked me why I have or haven't gone tinctures, especially with Elemental Hit of the Spectrum. Something I just learned recently is the calculation of tinctures is very different than with flasks. I'm talking about effect, okay? So let's start with flasks, just so I can kind of remind you on how these are calculated, something many of you may already know. Flasks have quality, just like tinctures, but the flask effect is only calculated 2 ways, okay? The quality doesn't actually impact the effect of flasks at all. It's just the duration. And so there's only 2 ways that flask effect can really be garnered. That's either through a global modifier, like, on this belt or on the passive tree, or a local modifier on the flask itself. Now, unfortunately, the flask effect multiplier is additive with the global. So the local and the global, they're just additive together. And that means a flask like this Quicksilver has 25% increase effect. And that's just 25% on top of the 104% that I have globally on there. So you can see here that I currently have a movement speed modifier of 87, and I'm just going to show you right up front how this works. So I have 25% increased effect and 104% increased effect from global modifiers. I actually only have 94% increased effect of flask if I don't have a tincture active and have hit an enemy recently. So together, that's going to be 25 plus 94, which is a multiplier of 119% additive increase of Flask effect. So if we take 2.19 times 40, it should get 70 or 87 increased movement speed multiplier. Well, that's ironic because that's exactly what I already have. So I should simply double this number. Remember, in Path of Exile, everything rounds down on decimals. So if I take 87 plus 87, it should give me 174. And indeed, if I use the Flask, I go up to 174. So that math checks out. Again, additive. Nothing from the quality. From the local to global Flask effect, it's just additive together. And this is one of the unfortunate aspects of like Mage Blood, where they're getting tons and tons of Flask effect and it's turned on all the time, which is amazing. The fact that it's turned on, that's huge quality of life. But it is really unfortunate that those two numbers aren't actually multiplicative with each other. Not so with tinctures. So tinctures, it's almost too good to be true. Tinctures are multiplicative in 3 separate ways, not 2 ways, but 3, counting the quality. So there is no duration with tinctures. They operate in a different fashion, and so quality is super premium. With tinctures, they increase the effectiveness of it, which is why, if you might have noticed, that high item level, especially item level 85, they can hit the maximum roll ranges. Quality above 20% is just super expensive on the market, and for good reason. Then we also have the prefix, in which case is the highest amount of increased effect you can get. That number is multiplicative with the quality. And then we also have the tincture effect through all the passive stuff, which, if you recall, I have 106% increased tincture effect. So let's see if this math checks out. First of all, we'll notice that I have a suffix modifier of overpowering. This is 19% elemental resistances. Now remember, that number got all the way up to 65, and here's the proof. If I turn the tincture on, it goes from 11 to 76, okay? So let's start with the quality. That's going to be a 1.27 multiplier to 19, and we get 24.13. Remember, again, Path of Exile numbers round down, so we need to reset this to 24 times 1.35. This is a separate multiplier of the prefix on the tincture, now at 32, and then if we take 32 times 2.06, that's 106% increased Flask effect, I get 65.92. Unfortunate, didn't quite reach the breakpoint on there, and that math also checks out. I have 65% increased elemental pen, which, I mean, elemental pen is one of the strongest modifiers in the game. That's a huge amount. So that's a pretty short and sweet video on the power of the current Flask bar that I'm using. Between the Flask and the tinctures, pretty crazy how strong that is. Now, I know some of you are probably going to argue that Mage Blood still beats this out, if nothing else for the quality of life of not having to press any of this stuff. Because yes, you actually have to press the tinctures, and you certainly have to press the Progenesis, although, it's up virtually all the time anyway. But I gotta say, it's pretty hard to argue against 4 Proj Dying Sun, 68% reduced hit damage from hits taken, the absolute absurd amount of damage between these two tinctures, not to mention the rarity and movement speed. Pretty crazy how much strength that gives when you opt into setting a character up this way. I really didn't expect to get this much power with or without this belt. It kind of just lost on me just how crazy strong tinctures are by themselves. And then I've only really begun visiting this idea of trying to crank up the number of proj and be able to do some crazy hard content on account of just taking so much less damage on hit through Progenesis. Being able to solve Chaos Res in one fell swoop, come on, like 95% increased chaos damage, that's absolutely absurd. That's 3 huge suffix modifiers on gear, effectively. So while Mage Blood definitely is really strong in some cases for some builds, and while Headhunter is certainly going to be better on some content, some mapping content, I think this belt is going to have a place in my arsenal. If nothing else, if I wanted to do 1,000 Uber X arcs in a row, I would certainly use this belt over anything else. You might be wondering how I crafted this, and it's honestly pretty simple craft. As far as, mirror tier character in-game build, this craft isn't that bad. It's Essence of Horror after you fracture. Essence of Horror for Alchemist Genius until I get a second suffix that's really good. I like the Flask Charges gain because that nullifies the reduced Flask Charges modifier on maps, so we get 96% reduced Flask Charges gain, which is really awful. Between that and Alchemist Genius, you're sitting pretty well on that map mod. And then I wanted preferably to be able to sub Headhunter in and out without any issues with my attributes. You see my attributes can still handle this swap. It's partially because I have a big strength dex roll on there. That was got by having suffixes not be changed, Reforged Veiled Chaos Orb, hit the suffix side, it's like a 50-50, or actually probably greater than that. But getting strength and dexes takes a little bit of luck. Strength and int would have been okay as well. And then do it again, suffixes cannot be changed, Reforged Life, take a good life roll, and then the Benchcraft. Honestly, pretty simple. Not terrible for, again, a build at this caliber already. If you were trying to make this belt in the early game, that would be another story. I mean, you can only get it through Heist anyway, so it's a little bit hard to get access to this belt super early in the game. But there you go, guys. That is a video. Hopefully you got some cool info out of this. You probably didn't know, like I didn't know, exactly how Tincture's effect is calculated multiplicatively 3 ways. Pretty enlightening to me. I would have never thought at the beginning of this league that I could get 95% chaos res just from a Progenesis, or take 68% less damage on hits. I mean, that alone is build enabling for some really hard content on an otherwise squishy character. And this is why I'm especially excited moving forward into some of the hardest content in the game, like what you saw earlier with the whole Wildwood Rogue Exile Titanic thing. We'll definitely be doing something like 100 Wildwoods in the future. We'll see what kind of drops we get that. There'll be a sort of mirror and lock hunting strategy. So look forward to that and other things as well. If you have any questions, you can use the comment section down below. I'll be happy to answer them. I love coming out with these tech videos and stuff, so really excited to share what I believe is, at least for me, easily the strongest Flask bar that I've ever had on any character at any progression point. +1 for Warden bows, I guess. I'll see you guys in the next video.